2007 on separation of powers, 1A and B was on separation of powers. Do you see it there? It's page 2 of your manual. So in at 2007 under separation of powers, put 1A and B. Personal rights came up in 5B. Proportionality came up in 5A and was relevant in 5B also. Just go along the line there. Just at the time this manual was done, the paper wasn't out. Property rights was question 4. Then drop down to the next box. Article 38.1, which is your due course of law, was question 3. And religion was question 2. So they're the 5 questions. Now, in terms of the style of the exam, if you look at that breakdown, and I'm not a huge fan of breakdowns because students follow them and try to see a pattern, and there definitely is a pattern there. Now, it's totally open to the examiner to examine whatever he wants, okay? And certainly, we're seeing a lot of that on FE1, is that the examiners begin to say, look, we're not going for the predictable things like trial and due course of law and separation of powers. We're going to go for some of the obscure areas that we equally expect you to be familiar with. John O'Dowd, who is the examiner in this bar course entrance exam, is also the lecturer in UCD. Now, I would have worked up there with John in UCD for the last 5 years, and some of you may even have had him as a lecturer. He is quite demanding in what he expects back in answers. He won't set a tricky paper. When we start looking back at exam questions, you'll see it is quite obvious what he wants. Where John is tough, I suspect, is in the marking. Now, he doesn't give us any examiner's report for me to see exactly what he expected and exactly what he felt about the standard of answer that he got. So we're not getting any feedback about how students are performing in his type of paper other than whether they pass or fail. But from my knowledge of him up in UCD, just bare knowledge of the cases is not going to get you through. John expects you to know the cases and know the legal principles and the reasoning behind those cases. So we'll be looking at that on some of the major fundamental cases. He also would expect comment and analysis on cases. Does a case throw up a possibility for a change in the law in future? Does the case vary in some way the principle that had been applied in a previous case? That's all in the manual. So a lot of the discussion that's in the manual about possibilities, questions that are thrown out by the manual, they're important because John expects that. He doesn't just expect you to give him back the cases. He wants the cases, he wants the leading cases, but he wants analysis and comment on the cases as well. Does everyone understand that? Okay, so he's not going to throw any tricks at you, but he will expect a good answer from you. Now, the reason we know that as well is you get 5 questions, you answer 3, and you have 3 hours, 1 hour a question. Okay, that's a lot of time to write on a topic. Now, his problem questions, particularly his trial and due course of law questions, tend to have a lot of information in them. So they're definitely going to take you an hour, but he has sometimes given a delegated legislation question and he wants an hour's worth of information from you on that. You're not going to get that from just a bare knowledge of the principles from the cases. Does everyone understand? Yeah, everyone understand? I hope I'm not frightening you, but you know, I think what you just need to understand, there will be no tricks. It'll be perfectly obvious to you, hopefully, what the question is examining you on, but a high standard of knowledge will be expected from you. Okay? So with that in mind, at times throughout the course, I'll actually give you case notes on cases. So where I feel that maybe John would expect you to focus in on a lot of the detail in a particular case, and the manual doesn't include all that detail, I will give you case notes that you can look at and that will supplement the information that's in the manual. We'd say, for example, like the Curtin case on the removal of judges, the A case about the effects of unconstitutionality. I don't know whether these principles are ringing bells in your head. I mean, just as a matter of interest, how many people would it be 3 years since you studied constitutional? Okay. Anybody, many for before that? Yeah. And anyone studied it in the last year or two? Okay, so we've some people who are more. I mean, the principles haven't changed, just the cases have. Okay, but there have been some really, really big cases since about 2005. Okay, so those really big cases where I would believe that if that issue came up, John would expect you to go into the case in a significant amount of detail. I will do case notes up for you and give them out to you. Okay, I'm trying to think now. Journal articles. I've recommended in that outline that you all look at the syllabus. John is very good in that he gives an actual syllabus with all the cases you're expected and relevant articles. So it's very much like the reading list that you would have been used to when you were at undergraduate level. Okay, and for those of you who are ex-UCD, it may even correspond with what he gave you out in UCD. Now, what I want to do is I will select some of those articles for you, and I will expect you to, well, I will recommend that you read them, okay? Again, the reason being, it's only on certain areas. Something like separation of powers, if you get a question on delegated legislation, there really isn't enough in the cases, and you're not going to have enough analysis and commentary for an hour's answer. So I think if you read 1, max 2 journal articles, took a bit out of them, and were able to give that back in your answer, in addition to the cases, that's what John is looking for. Mere regurgitation of cases is not going to get you through an exam that John O'Dowd sets. Okay, so what I will do is I will be selective in the journal articles that I recommend. Now obviously you can read them all if you want, and those of you who want to be absolutely sure of scoring the high marks, that's what it will take. But what I will be doing is recommending that for people to very comfortably get through this exam, I will be recommending certain journal articles. And how I'll select them is really on the basis of what's the most modern journal articles or what I think are the best ones. Now I'm going to go through with the library staff just to make sure that whatever articles I recommend to you, they're available in the library either in hard copy or on Westlaw or LexisNexis, okay, so that I'm not recommending you read something that you can't access here in the library. Okay, trying to think, is there anything else I need to explain to you? No, I think as we go along, things will come to my head. Now, you're all fairly happy that on easy topics, I sort of expect you to do a bit of the reading and I just highlight the main difficult aspects to you. And then on the more difficult topics, I concentrate and slow down a little bit and we look at those in greater detail. Okay, everybody happy with that? The other thing is, please watch it. I mean, there is a definite pattern. I mean, to the extent that he nearly has the same question every year on the same topic. Like question 1 for the last 3 years has been separation of powers. Question 3 for the last 4 years has been due process. He could change that at any time, and I don't know when he's going to change that. So while you can say, okay, on statistics and balance of probabilities, they're likely to come up again, I wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed that you're going to get that predictable a paper. His paper is becoming very predictable, and he's leaving out topics, and he's just not ever examining them. He won't be able to continue doing that. As I said, his paper will just become far too predictable. When he decides to change his pattern, I don't know, but please be careful, okay? There are some topics that are quite small, and really the problem for John is probably that they're not big enough for an hour's question in an exam. Okay, but one area is like locus standi and mootness. He hasn't really examined that much, yet that's an area that's absolutely huge and could fill a 1-hour exam question. So, you know, maybe that's something that will come up. We also have to watch things that are particularly topical. Now, one thing that's particularly topical recently would be the issue of cabinet confidentiality and, you know, Oireachtas privilege. But he actually examined that, I think, he examined that last in 2007. So you'd have to ask yourself whether he'd put it on the 2008 paper when he examined it so recently. The other thing we'd want to take a look at, and something he hasn't really examined before, is the effects of a finding of unconstitutionality, because we would have had the big A case on that. And that's something that's topical, it's something that's chunky, it's something that's big. John also likes to examine issues. I mean, he puts in some questions that really allows the very good student to absolutely shine and stun him. And for the weaker student, they're comfortable with it, they know what he's asking, and they will feel they have done a good answer. For other questions then, like trial and due course of law, he puts lots of things in, and it's easy to pick up marks along each of the points, okay? And you'll see his style as we go through it. What I plan to do is basically go through topics and then highlight particular questions that I think you should take a look at, or we may take a look at the end of class. Because again, what I want you to do is not only to be able to have the information to answer the exam, but as important is to be able to identify in an exam what are the topics this man is actually examining me. It doesn't tend to be difficult. He tends to be quite clear about what he's examining. Okay? Is everyone all right? Any questions? No? I presume everyone can hear me okay, yeah? Okay, I have a good loud voice. Now, we're going to take a look